Instagram?
Like bloggers about the food that they eat.
Oh my God, yes. Are you tired of seeing what everybody's eating for every meal, or does that still interest you?
Yeah,
Food
like
blogging is
what am
not
I
a
eating
personality
today?
trait.
I mean, it was fun to begin with, you know, like 10 years ago. It was fun to share your meal with somebody like that. And it still is. It is, but you know, we just have so many images of that. What does it take to make something that gets your attention? In terms of Instagram. Do you look to journals or certain websites, blogs that have good images, say good food images?
Sometimes like just the restaurants that you follow on Instagram have like just a really good presentation of the food that they're actually like serving.
Mm-hmm. You know, I think it would be fun to actually see, if I were to go to your Instagram accounts, I'm sure that I would find some food pictures. Am I not right? Yeah.
Right now,
I actually don't have any food pictures.
I think I actively try to avoid those, but you might, guilty as charged.
What about you, Amelia? Do you have any?
Probably somewhere from vacations, but I have no idea.
Okay. Tyler, what about you? Do you have any food pictures on Instagram?
No, I know that people don't care, so I don't do that.
Somebody, can you let whoever it is in? Nicole, is that Rachel?
Let me double check.
Okay. So moving forward here, what I want you to do is, you know, there's a lot of creative work being done and shown on Instagram, but it's also, you know, not the most curated space, to say the least. You know, just so much gets put out there. And whenever I start researching a subject in art, I like to go to major collections. I'm going to show you in the slideshow how to go about researching a little bit and where I found my images to get a sense of what is considered, you know, significant in terms of photography and art. That's part of all of these assignments, that you become more aware of what's happening in contemporary practice as well as historic work. So I like to frame it a little bit historically and then put it into contemporary context. So that's what we're going to be doing. Emphasis is on, now you don't have to do color, you can do color, black and white, but we're going to be looking at color interactions as if you're using color. And then, of course, looking at formal elements, positive, negative space. Cezanne was a master of positive, negative space. He was a master formalist. So I not only look at photography, but I look at other artwork. If I'm interested in food, then I'll search a collection and put food, not food in, I mean, I'll do food and photography as well. But, you know, there are lots of other mediums that approach food creatively. So I think when I think of positive, negative space in food, I think of Cezanne, actually. Okay.
Even,
so,
can you make me co-host so I can let Rachel in?
Oh, sure. Let's see here. Okay, you should be set there. Okay. So, and then you're also going to be thinking about all the different elements that you put in, what the relationship is, and, you know, the negative space, how the negative space informs the subject matter and meaning, how you're going to use some of the technical aspects in photographing, such as depth of field. You're going to use shallow depth of field, extended depth of field. Maybe there's some motion in the picture. I'm going to show you some examples where all of these things, whether it's technical, formal, or conceptual, have some interesting element in it that makes it strong, a feature that sticks out that the photographer is using very intentionally to convey the meaning. So we'll look at that in the slideshow. As far as requirements, you can really use any lighting you want for this, but if you want to go into the studio, I would encourage you to use the tungsten lights, the Todas, which you have now, you should now know how to use. You can also check out, we have a couple of kits, but we would have to arrange that. We did go over all of this. So you can catch up on the assignment. If there's anything that you missed, that you don't understand, just follow up with Nicole on it. Any kinds of questions about this assignment sheet before I move forward? I did make one change to our schedule because today I just like to focus on looking at work, and I thought it would be too much to do both going over the work and slideshows and demos. It would just be too long of a presentation. So I'm doing the demo on Monday, and we'll do individual meetings. And this is reflected in the current schedule. I uploaded it to Blackboard, so you will have that revised schedule. Okay, so everybody catch that? Nicole, did you get that?
Yeah.
Okay, so right here, September 28th is actually the Photoshop demo. And then I pushed this individual meetings to Wednesday. Okay, good. So I do have to do a new share, so bear with me. Okay. Does everybody see the PowerPoint? Nicole?
Yep.
Okay, great. So, as I said before, we're going to be looking at an overview of some work relating to food, starting with some historic pieces and then moving into more contemporary practice. Photography follows traditions and conventions of art. So again, what I said before is if I'm looking for food images, then I also look at painting, sculpture, anything that has a creative approach. And typically, whatever photography is doing, it typically is happening in other media. How do you start thinking about food in photography? These are just some ideas that are being conveyed in the work that I'm showing you, as well as ideas that go beyond the work. When I think of food, I think of consumption on many different levels. That is consuming the food. I think of economics. I think of accessibility. I think of overconsumption, underconsumption. So that's immediately what I think of. There are different ideas and themes here: food in the body, food as sustenance, food as ritual, health and medicine, social justice, diet. I mean, how many times do we think about, our society is so fixed on diet, so obsessed with diet. Artificial food, like what actually defines food? How do you define food? It's something that you eat. Maybe there are different ways of thinking about food that isn't something we literally eat. Food and illness. So of course, there's a relationship to food and health and food and illness as well. There are carcinogens in our society. Food and spirit, that's what I was talking about before. So how does maybe food play into the spirit of the human being? Food and culture. There are many different kinds of foods related to different cultures, right? Food and sexuality. They're both driven by a kind of desire. So you really can't separate the two in terms of meaning. So this is one of the early pieces by Edward Manet, not Monet, but Manet, who preceded Cezanne and influenced him. You can see that this is a tableau arrangement of food. Typically you would have fruits and vegetables, a wine bottle, in this picture here, you have a flower. It's a very constructed, well-balanced, intentional composition with elements that are formally arranged to make for a well-balanced picture. So you see that there's, you know, an equal amount of positive, negative space. You see the repetition in the forms, the circles. You see the balance of light and dark. There's really beautiful rendition of light and shadow in the image. And it's just a very pleasing compositional painting. This was done in 1866. And of course, we talked about Cezanne, the master of still life. This is a little bit different here. You see, maybe you can identify some of the differences, anybody? Between the Manet and the Cezanne? What else was Cezanne really known for? The still lifes and what else? What do you see in this painting?
He had like an odd perspective.
Excellent. So this is more of a perspective straight on, right? And things that are typically larger are in the foreground, smaller in the background. What happens here with the space?
Well, Cezanne painted landscapes, right? Hint, hint.
Yes, so this is looking like a landscape, but what in terms of space, in terms of, if you were to think of this in terms of scale, what do you see going on?
Everything's around the same size, so the image looks flat.
That's right. Everything has a kind of equal emphasis, doesn't it, in terms of scale? What else do you notice? So it's not a natural perspective at all, right? I mean, the photography image is what we would call a Renaissance perspective that is based on a rectilinear lens. That is, it creates a kind of this one-point perspective. So here, it's bringing the background forward, right? That's not really the way we see things. Nicole, can you keep on top of the students coming in and out? Oh, that's Katrina, okay. So the color is also really vibrant, isn't it? If you compare this picture with this picture, this earlier still life is more subdued. It has a more limited palette. Look at how vibrant that is. And the interaction of colors. What kind of colors create that vibrancy? Anybody? Who knows a little bit about color theory? So I'm thinking, when I look at this, I'm thinking that there's an interaction of color going on. What colors do we see in the picture?
Red and green.
Red and green. And what is the relationship between red and green?
They're complementary.
Thank you. Complementary colors, right? So in color, we use color to create, we can use color to create contrast, and contrast in color is created using complementary colors. In black and white, it's a difference of tone, right? So if we have a high contrast image, it's a very white and black image with very few tones in between. That's contrasty. In color, it's complementary colors that create that sense of contrast and vibrancy, right? I think that this perspective is really interesting. As a photographer, I'm always thinking about space and how the lens translates the space that we ordinarily see through two eyes and our experience as we move through the world. So, I mean, the camera lens does attempt to mimic the way the human being sees, but this painter here didn't even attempt, wasn't even interested in that kind of space or seeing. They're much more interested in defying that, saying that look, this is a painting. It's not a photograph. We're not basing the painting on a photograph, which, you know, coming out of the Renaissance and for a couple of hundred years or a few hundred years, painters were basing their work on that Renaissance perspective. And this is a break with that in terms of, you know, this is the modernist period where painting really wanted to establish itself as a separate medium. And that's the basis of modernism. So if we look at this piece here, this is a very early piece, photograph by Henry Fox Talbot. This photograph was taken in 1845. So if we look at this and we look at this piece here, what are the similarities?
Composition, the composition of it.
Yeah, composition. So this, you know, there's fruit on the table, right? There's a kind of a bowl shaped object or objects. There's fruit in it. There's a dark background to bring the fruit forward, to separate it and create contrast and definition within the subject. So if you see here, the use of the same thing, notice that the subject is light against a dark background to bring out that detail of the subject. So you can see the similarities that photography was just at that time in 1845 really doing what painting was doing. And in 1845, how old is photography? When was photography invented? Anybody?
Like I think like a decade-ish before this.
Okay, close. The formal year is 1839. There were some things that were done before that, but what did it actually mean for photography to be invented? What was invented? Was it the camera? Was it, I mean, what was it?
A way of like fixing an image, so to speak.
Exactly. So again, the cameras in the camera lucida and the camera obscura, all those cameras had existed before photography was invented. What happened around the 1830s was that they figured a way to fix the image onto a surface. Okay, and that's the invention of photography. So you can see that you know, this kind of tradition came out of this kind of picture making in terms of the subject matter came out of the arts at the time, what artists were doing at the time. Photography just didn't all of a sudden, you know, come up with a new way of doing things in terms of subject matter. Now it did technologically, but it took a long time. It took over 100 years for photography to really start having its own language, visually and artistically. So this is just a crazy image. Has anybody seen this image before?
Yes.
Yeah, where have you seen this image, Peter?
I don't remember particularly where I've seen it, but I've seen this artist before and I like his work.
Oh my gosh, yeah. So
I saw the four-season ones in the Louvre. The one where each season has its own like food made up.
Yes. And I mean, this looks so contemporary, doesn't it? This could be done today. It's so incredibly inventive, but it was done in 1590. And I just love, you know, when I remember when I was very young, one of my teachers told me, "You are what you eat." How many of you have heard that phrase, right? That saying? Well, this pretty much says it right here, you know? And what would the contemporary body look like if we are what we eat? You know, I think that the depiction, if we were to translate, you know, this kind of idea where the body is made up of the food that we eat, our body would look so different. Yeah. What can anybody describe what our body might, if we were to construct the body out of things that we eat today, what would it look like? Oh my gosh, is that pizza? Oh, that,
That is,
oh no,
that
it's pasta.
that is chicken riggies.
Oh my gosh. Okay. Well, that's actually a relatively healthy looking, meal there.
I love chicken riggies. They're so
It's not
good.
healthy.
Okay. But, we have really that consumerist fast food culture, right? So I'm not saying that everybody eats that way, but, a lot of Americans eat that way, and our bodies look very different compared to what, the average body looked like hundreds of years ago. And it's reflected in what we eat and how we eat. Joel Peter Witkin, fast forward a few hundred years here, his work is this is one of the tamer pieces. His work is very controversial and grotesque. This is what I consider to be one of his more beautiful images, called The Harvest. And you can see the influence there, right? You can see he's doing a very similar thing, but he's taking the Native American portrait and bringing in, the theme of the harvest, right? The connection to the land, from within the culture itself, the Native American culture, and the connection to harvest and land, which I just think is such a beautiful portrait, really. Another Joel Peter Witkin, one of his tamer images. There you see an amputee, or not an amputee, but an actual, leg that's been amputated, and a fish and fruit, and making a still life. Now, it's shocking, right? We're not expecting to find an amputated leg within a still life. So a lot of his images were meant to shock, and they do, believe me. Most of them are in black and white, and that tames them down a bit. But he's just such a psychologically disturbed person, and and a very well-known artist and photographer. But I did not want to. There are some images that I just don't care for, that I find kind of violent. But in any case, this follows a more traditional depiction of a still life, except that there's a crazy amputated leg in there. And it's beautifully depicted, right? I mean, that's the thing, that artists sometimes use formalism and beauty to convey something that is disturbing. You ever seen like a really beautifully made film? Just gorgeous cinematography, and the subject matter is really difficult? It's the same kind of idea. This was done in the 1930s, called Drop of Milk, and it's a very famous picture by Harold Edgerton, who was more a scientific photographer. He was responsible for developing the high intensity flash, and this is in the collection of the George Eastman House in Rochester, New York, not too far away. A lot of you have seen this image, I think. This is a very, very close-up view of what a drop of milk looks like when it strikes, the milk, and the tension and the action that it creates. And it was captured using, high-end flash strobe photography when it was invented during this time in the 30s, thanks to Edgerton. So this is more a technological picture, but it's still incredibly fascinating, and formally really interesting. So, it may be that you want to explore something that takes advantage of, a technical aspect of your camera. Like I said before, using motion, say stop action or motion blur, to convey an idea about food that somehow speaks to your concept. So, you know, he used milk, which is an everyday food that people can relate to, and yet he did something extraordinary with it using the technology that he developed. Here we have, this picture was taken a little bit earlier by Edward Steichen. Edward Steichen was what we consider to be a modernist. He was taking sort of soft focus pictures coming out of the secessionist period in New York. And then in the teens, he, along with some other photographers, started developing the language of modernist photography that concentrated on detail. So here you have a kind of combination of taking a traditional arrangement. You know, here we have, this is 3 pears and an apple, you know, very traditional form. And yet he's bringing modernist ideas, you know, of the time in 1921. That is a kind of emphasis on form and detail. So it looks a bit like a drawing, doesn't it? Looks a bit like just a very detailed rendered pencil drawing or graphite drawing. Here's an early picture by Irving Penn, the famous fashion photographer. Anybody heard of him? He did a lot of work for Vogue magazine, a lot of the early fashion photography magazines, and he was the leading fashion photographer in New York during the time. This is, you know, it's kind of a pun. Fish made of fish in the form of fish. So he uses formalism a lot. Like all of his images are really beautifully composed, and they tend to have a nice balance of positive, negative space. And detail. So he's using a large format, he uses large format photography, or you use large format photography, or you have, if you were to see this picture in person, you would see every little scale on that fish. Oh, and then here we go with Andy Warhol. I know you all have seen these pictures. So what was it about Andy Warhol's work? Anybody?
He took everyday objects and made art out of them.
Yeah, right. So until this time, until the 1960s, did you ever see things typically that were done by mass consumption? You know, things that were mass produced? No, you didn't. And this was reflective of the highly industrial complex that we were seeing, you know, really full power, right, coming out of after the war, after World War II, and building up these industries and the impact of it on American culture and consumerism. So what happened here, what's significant about, there are many significant things about his work. One is that he completely, you know, he removed the hand. These are screen prints. He's calling a screen print a painting. He's mass producing it. And that's not typically what we thought of paintings before. We thought of, you know, paintings being an original, one of a kind, and it retaining its value because of that. And here we have, in this series, 32 soup cans, you know, with different flavors. And they're screen prints, and they look, you know, almost identical, except that the flavor is different.
He mass produces a mass production object.
Exactly. And so this is a lot of what pop culture was about in the 60s as it emerged, is looking at that mass production, looking at, you know, what does society look like now, right? It doesn't look like that still life painting that we saw in the 19th century. He was a mirror to society, right? This is the kind of food that we're eating. And this is the kind of world that we live in. And that's what makes contemporary work. It always, you know, for significant, important work that you see in collections, it is that it speaks to its time, or maybe it's even ahead of its time, right? But there's something about it that maybe we're looking back and we're saying, oh yeah, I've seen that done before, but you haven't seen it. If you were back in the 60s, you had not seen it before. So you always have to pay attention to the date in the context of something that's been created. And sometimes some of these ideas reoccur. It's just like with fashion and clothing, you know, there's that back to the 60s, you know, people wearing 60s clothing and 70s, and you know, these trends come and go and return and go, and so, but there's always some new take to it as well. There might be, you know, it might be a new technology that somehow influences the look of the work. But again, this was kind of, you know, about mass production. And this is actually, I wanted to throw this in there because I wanted to just emphasize the point that, you know, look at other work, not just photography, not just painting. And I found this, it's done by an unknown manufacturer, and in Tokyo, Japan in 1975. And if you've ever been to, I don't know, New York City, if you look at some restaurants, they'll have these plastic meals in their window, right? That's what these were created for. They were created for settings that they could place maybe in their restaurant window. Plastic food. I mean, you know what? We are eating plastic food today. There are plastics in some, literally, there are plastics in some of our food. And here's another sculptural piece called Mystery Food Metal Can. And I just wanted to make that connection between Andy Warhol's work, you know, of mass production, and then adding a little mysterious twist to it. Like, you know, we don't really know what's in there, mystery food. So this is not a photograph. It is a photograph of a sculpture, which is a can called Mystery Food, done around the same time that Andy Warhol was making his work. We go back a little bit to see some more of Irving Penn. I love this picture. Now, I think that Katrina and Nicole, you've seen the Jan Groover work, right? Now, yeah. This was done in 1947. Do you see the correlation between this and Jan Groover's work?
Did Groover pull any inspiration from Penn? I mean.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. And look at the space. I mean, you know, her work is always this shifting of space. Look at what Penn does here in terms of space. Look at that negative space and the darkness in the foreground, and the sense of, you know, that kind of deepness. This is not a pretty scene. There's something mundane about it, but there's also something dark about it. And it's a simple setting. You know, there's also this implied absence, right? The food is no longer there. So you don't have to necessarily take pictures of food for it to be about food. It could be about the absence of food. Another Irving Penn called Edifice, done in 1979. So you see he had a very long, successful career. And he did a lot of different work, a lot of commercial work, and his work is in the collections of major museums because they also crossed over into art and photography. So, you know, here you see these bones that he built into a kind of, he calls this edifice. He made a whole series that looks like, you know, landscapes of New York, an urban setting. And this is one of his color pictures that is similar. They're more abstract, the frozen food series, but you know, taking food, and this reminds me a little bit of Warhol in the sense that, you know, it's that mass production idea and the repetition of form, using the repetition of form to say that, and then the frozen, you know, the frozen food form. So it's, you know, you can do all kinds of things with food to reshape it and to, you know, to create new meaning through different approaches to the food. So different forms, wetting it, freezing it, changing the color of it. This I'd like to show you, even though it looks like, you know, very kind of simple composition. It's really beautifully lit, very well balanced. And what I like about it is it's called ingredients. So it's not just a random picture of things that are pretty to put into this still life picture, but it's actually the ingredients of a dish that he's making. So, you know, might be interesting to do like a whole series on ingredients. It could even be a guessing game. You know, it's like, okay, we've got all these elements in here, and what do you think it makes? Yeah. Mapplethorpe, he did not do a lot of food photography. He too was a fashion photographer and had a significant body of work, of personal work that explored his subculture, of his gay subculture. And a lot of his work related to sexuality. So even, you know, when I look at these grapes, I think about his work in context. I don't just see these as grapes. I see them as him exploring sexuality through food, because his work is all about sexuality. So when I look at this, I see him, you know, this in the context of his body of work. Okay. Then we have Stephen Shore. You know, this is a bit different. It's more, this is really formal. Like everything in it is controlling it, right? The composition, the lighting, it just looks like a very well constructed studio shot. And he was a master of studio photography. Here we have a really different approach. Stephen Shore, who became very influential to the next generation of, and still even contemporaries, in terms of color photography and American culture. So he would take road trips and photograph in these Americana settings. This is called Breakfast, Trails End Restaurant. You know, it's more about the ordinary, the mundane, the Americana of the dining, eating experience. So, you know, this is not a scene that you would see if you went to Egypt or even European countries. You know, this is a very American breakfast, right? And the diner experience. Katrina, did you throw any of Cindy Sherman into your slide presentation?
I didn't know.
What about you, Nicole?
I did not.
Okay. So Cindy Sherman's work, she is most famous for her film stills. Maybe you're familiar with that. She continued, she's been a prolific artist and using the self-portrait. So in the self-portrait, she did these film stills exploring the female role in films in the 50s. This work, which was done in the 80s, also looks at consumer culture. You can see the little picture of her in the glasses there. There she is. She's usually always in the picture, and here it's much more discreet. But this is just one scary picture of what our consumerist society looks like, with all of that sugar. It's so grotesque. She's pointing to a very ugly version of maybe what Warhol was doing in the 60s. She starts to look at it in a much more in a tableau format, using the self-portrait, and then also just drawing attention to the overconsumption, America's overconsumption. Very different work. Vic Muniz, an artist who uses multiple forms: photography, sculpture, drawing. This is a series of pictures that's called the Sugar Children series. And he uses the sugar to actually create the drawings. These particular subjects he was drawing attention to the kind of industrial complex that exists in other countries, where there is this sort of hidden child labor, which we no longer have in this country, or we don't think that we have. So drawing attention to child labor and the loss of that, you know, the children's life to production and industrialization. So here we have, you know, sugar is something sweet, so is innocence, right? So he's using sugar very symbolically and also literally, because it was one of the first industrial foods to be driven by slave trade in the Caribbean and in the US. So there's a real connection here between, you know, industrialization, slavery, and child labor. This was I always like to find a contemporary exhibition of whatever the theme is. And this is a show called Feast for the Eyes, the story of food and photography. Believe me, it's a very abbreviated form, and it's you know, it's all of these curated exhibitions are just you know, one person's idea of what the theme is, and it's a very limited but can be really creative, insightful exhibition. So this I found is this is presented by Foam. Foam has a magazine, a journal too. It's an international photography magazine, which I would encourage you to look at. Ukulele's picture here is the picture that I used at the beginning of the slideshow. But here, I just thought this is, you know, really inventive use of food. The color is beautiful. This reminds me a lot, Ed Ruscha. Anybody heard of Ed Ruscha? Contemporary of Andy Warhol's. This was done in 1961. You can see attention to that, you know, the canned food. This looks like, you know, he even cut it in the form of a piece of meat, you know, as if this were a piece of meat carved. So, you know, we're no longer eating things that are real, but they're manufactured and come out of cans. Joseph Maida is a photographer who focuses on sexuality and queer culture. So here's an interesting juxtaposition of fish, which is symbolic sexually, as well as donuts. This is, oh, by the way, these are all pictures in the exhibition. So you can see that there's quite a variety here. You know, this was done in '79, this was done in '61, this was done in 2015, and this was done in 1940. So this image right here speaks to, this was done as part of the FSA organization in photographing the poverty in America during and after the Depression. So Russell Lee crossed the United States, and he did a lot of documenting of people living in poverty. Ouija, I'm sure that you've seen his work. He was one of the most well-known crime photographers in New York City. He also photographed a lot of, well, mafia. He's really into that kind of narrative. I think this is just more, you know, he was into attention getting and grabbing. This is just, you know, an aspect of that. Maybe drawing attention to, it says, the title says a lot. Philip Stezone is on WPA, enjoys his favorite food as he's heard that the army doesn't go in very strong for serving spaghetti. So this is quite a title, but it's also, you can see narrative and a bit humorous. Another picture in the exhibition. This is a photo sculpture, meaning that it's a sculpture then photographed. So you can see, I think this is quite inventive, taking forms and food forms and painting them and then creating a new form. I think that this is a very kind of, well, what does this make you think of? I'm not going to say what I think. I'm curious to know what you see in this picture. Anybody?
It's very Seussical.
It's what?
Seussical, like Dr. Seuss.
Oh, yes, yes. I see that. Anybody else? It's whimsical, right? What else? Nicole, I think we're going to have to start doing the comments for points approach.
Possibly. I just, you know, those like troll doll things with the hair. That's just like neon.
Yes.
Oh my goodness.
Yes. Oh my God. I mean, it is a little bit, if you start to look in detail about what it's constructed of, you see that there's hair on the top that is in rubber bands, and that it starts to get a little, I don't know, a little grotesque, I think.
If you go with like traditional gender standards and whatnot, this is a very feminine, or seems like a very feminine picture, because it's a lot of pink and it's like, it's not like sensual curves or anything, but it is a more curvy figure type of thing. So
I think you're onto something there, Shannon. And you are onto something there. And this is what I'm thinking as well, that the pink is a very feminine color. And so is the red in terms of blood, and maybe the idea of menstruating, you know, just the things that we think of in terms of, you know, we tend to think of blood more related to female than male in sexuality, and then also pink in terms of gender, right, with female gender. So, but what's interesting, and the flowers, of course, right, the pink flowers. But what's interesting is that they're more phallic. Like the symbols, the shapes of them are more phallic. Don't you think? Do you see that, anybody?
Yeah.
So it's this, you know, when you first look at it, it's like it just looks like a pretty or bizarre kind of sculpture, right? But when you start to analyze it more, there's a lot of symbolism there, you know, sexual symbolism there. Martin Parr, oh boy, you know, you can see the similarity between Martin Parr and Stephen Shore's work. Going around, Martin Parr is a very famous British photographer, documentary, social landscape photographer. Here you have Untitled Hot Dog Stand. This totally reminds me of Nathan's. How many of you have been to Nathan's in New York City? How many of you have heard of Nathan's? Where there's the famous, you know, contest every year, how many hot dogs can you eat? anyway, you can see here, this is in New Brighton, England, and people are clearly enjoying their hot dogs, or, you know, about to enjoy their hot dogs. This, to me, you know, relates to this. This could be America. I think that, you know, Britain and America have a lot in common. So there are two videos that I want to show you, particularly this one. I talked about Sam Taylor Wood's work last class, and I said that there's this time-lapse piece that she did. This is it's a video installation. It's in the Tate Modern collection. So I'm going to end up with these two pieces, and I'm hoping that I don't have to go out and share a new screen with you. Nicole, let me know. I think I'm going to.
Writing's not that easy, but Grammarly can help.
You can't see my browser, can you?
No, we can.
Oh, you can?
Yep.
Yeah, I can see it.
Sentence is grammatically correct, but it's wordy and hard to read. It undermines the writer's message, and the word choice is bland. Grammarly's cutting-edge technology helps you craft compelling, understandable writing that makes an impact on your reader. Much better. Are you ready to give it a try? Installation
You
is
can skip at the bottom.
free. Visit
I'm not seeing it.
Grammarly.com today.
Oh, there
The
it is.
bottom right.
Skip ad.
Okay. That's the mold.
Mold is a crazy thing.
It is. It is. What does it make you think of?
I think Will hit it right on the head in the chat. That it looks like a snowy mountaintop landscape. I mean,
Yeah.
if you're taking the more positive route.
Yeah. So, you know, take this. This was done in 2013. Take this and harken back to the very beginning of, the early still lifes, or the beginning of the slideshow when we were looking at the still lifes. This is a very traditional still life arrangement, except that it uses the current technology. That is how is this created? Anybody?
Time lapse.
Time lapse. It was time lapse. So time lapse is a series of still images taken over time, right? And this was, I can't remember how many days was it a month or, but, it was just set up so it would take pictures throughout the day or every day over a period of time until it, let me see if we can go to the end here.
That's a lot of mold. I feel like that has to be more than a couple of days. It's
it's definitely, yeah, it's about, at least a month.
Mm-hmm. Plus, it catches on. So
that, and I like this piece a lot. I like the music, the soundtrack to it.
Fun
I don't like that. There's a sense of, Will, like you were seeing a kind of landscape there, but there's a mood, when you're listening to that music, and there's a sense of decay. There's like this beauty at the same time as decay and death, right? But it's just life, right? And this is like, who's familiar with vanitas? Anybody? The art form? No? The vanita is a form, is a type of theme or subgenre of art that focuses on death, life and death. So it was very popular in the 17th century, and it's continued throughout, the centuries as a theme. And so Sam is using this kind of theme of maybe you look at it as death, but also renewal.
Sometimes I forget that like mold is almost like an actual living creature, and I just think of it as like, I don't even know, like it surprises me sometimes.
Yes, it's exchanging one form of life for another, right? Mold is a living organism. So I think it's interesting to think, we think mold and we think, oh, gross, throw it away. But mold is a form of life, and our attitudes towards molds have more to do with sustenance than it does, from the mold's perspective. So, mold becomes, when we see mold, it becomes unedible, but when in fact it's just a new form of life, it's transforming. So I'm gonna end with that piece, because there's another piece there by Sam that you may want to watch of rabbit decay and maggots eating away at the flesh. It's not something that you probably want to look at maybe this early in the morning.
I was gonna say, can we not watch?
But it's along the same ideas, but it's a little bit darker, right? I mean, it's hard to look at an animal form going through this as opposed to fruit and vegetables. So I hope you enjoyed that slideshow, and it's giving you some ideas for this project. I want you to be creative. I want you to be inventive. We also have a couple of slideshows that Nicole prepared and Katrina prepared. So they did some research, and I'm going to let you two share your screen.
Who do
Nicole,
you?
do you want to go first?
Sure, I can go first. Yeah, that works.
I love that you still have the chicken riggies as your picture background.
Okay, so we'll start with photographer Dina Belenko. She is a Russian photographer, and a lot of her photographs are untitled, but they come from titled series. And so this was a photograph she took in 2015. Basically, I think she used a chalkboard and then laid out a bunch of different oranges to create this kind of tree structure. In her own words, there's nothing that inspires me more than coffee and sweets. And if you look up even more of her work, that's absolutely true. She does a lot of work with movement and like coffee splashes and just throwing liquid around all over the place. She writes in milk at some point. This is some more of her work. She made kind of like balloons out of oranges, and she made a clock out of like coffee in its different forms. So you can see up at 12 o'clock here, like there's a splash cubes, other forms of like granulated sugar, coffee beans. And then I like how at like 8 o'clock down here, there's just like stain and no mug.
Yeah,
And then obviously the spoons make the hands and whatnot. So that is Dina Belenko from Russia. And she also does a lot of work with like suspending objects and motion, as I said. So she made a Newton's cradle out of eggshells and then photographed it. So if anyone's familiar with the concept of, you know, motion and energy and a Newton's cradle, there's that for you. I found that pretty innovative.
Yeah.
This one, it's a little dark. I hope you can see it. So Matt Collishaw is an English photographer working in a modern medium, still doing photography today. This is from a series about death row inmates. And so this image is called Last Meal on Death Row. And he arranged food items based on the personal experiences of what death row inmates ate as their last meal. So in this image, I think there's like corn, there's peppers, there's meat of some sort, maybe chicken or like a roast on potatoes or something. And you can Google and find a lot more of these, but this is probably his most well-known from that series. Going into another photographer, this is Christa van der Niet. She is a current professor of photography at the Royal Academy of Art in the Netherlands. And she does a lot of kind of color relationship photography. Her work is very kind of whimsical. So she did some work with eggshells, and obviously you can see that this kind of tablecloth here complements her work. And she just took yolks and eggshells and separated the two of them. And there's a sense of like symmetry, but also asymmetry, which is why I like it. The title is just egg in Dutch. Some more of her work, she's done a lot for Arts Holland magazine and a lot of just Dutch magazines in general. So she created this studio space with, I think, like a granite countertop and a black background, and she laid all of these fruits down and then set butterflies loose, and this was kind of the result. Eva Fiorkovakoski, sorry, I'm butchering the names here, is a Swiss photographer who basically prides herself on doing pictures of frozen fruit and vegetables, particularly from her freezer. And she loves lettuce and cabbage and root vegetables. And so this is from her Plates series from 2012. But you can also see that there's like more grotesque versions where she's quite literally photographing the inside of her freezer. And so this is the frozen still life from 2012 with just heads of lettuce. And you can see that the freezer is pretty iced over. So either she's left it open a bit and it's just continuously frosting over, or she like turned the temperature all the way down. But either way, I found it kind of cool. Here's another one where she just spilled a bunch of like split peas, and there's some oranges and an apple in there as well, from the same series, that Frozen Still Lives. Irving Penn, who we already kind of touched upon, very famous photographer, one of my favorites. Did a lot of photography for Vogue, particularly for articles revolving around nutrition, food, obesity, commercialism, stuff like that. So here's one with kind of the insides of a bunch of fruit and other vegetables. Very kind of minimalist, but also not, with the white background there, obviously, you know, oh, sorry. Obviously a conscious decision, as well as kind of color relationships as well. So that was from December of 2002. Here's another one with a slab of raw steak.
Yeah.
And I'm not quite sure in this image what's being conveyed. I mean, it is a very kind of aesthetically pleasing photograph, and it was a commission for this article you can see on the right here.
Maybe it was the Heart Association.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, I just think of steak and eggs, but in...
It looks high cholesterol to me.
Yeah, agreed. So that was from 1994. This is another one, Irving Penn's Beef Still Life, from 1943. Quite a large image.
I like the collection of seeing, you know, the image, the 2D drawing, and along with that as a kind
yeah,
of backdrop.
So a lot of Irving Penn's work is either on display or owned like in archives by the Metropolitan Museum of Art currently. Here's another one of poached eggs and salt on inkjet print that he did for Condé Nast. I'm butchering the pronunciation again, is basically just the parent company of a bunch of fashion magazines, including Vogue. So there's that. And I believe that's the end of it, so.
Oh, that was a great presentation. Those were really inventive. A lot of colorful work, playful, clever. Any comments? Anybody? How did you do your research?
So I was familiar with obviously like Irving Penn, and then I knew who Dina Balenko was just because I'm a big fan of her work, and I think she's on Instagram.
Mm-hmm.
But for other ones, I just used Art Store and some other kind of databases in there, some Google searches. Tried to find a variety of countries, you know, obviously not just American photography. So it's kind of interesting to see what other people are doing and how some of it looks, you know, rather similar and conveys a sense of modernism, while other ones kind of speak to, I guess, traditional kind of conceptualizations of a still life.
Mm-hmm.
So obviously, you know, the freezer is a little bit out there, but so,
Yeah, you can see, you can definitely see the connections, you know, the Irving Penn influences in this work. You see that. Even the Jan Groover, which Katrina, are you showing any Jan Groover?
Yeah.
Excellent, excellent. We've really got a variety here. The eggs and the time remind me a little bit of Edgerton's work. You know, it's a scientific idea. Okay, so Katrina is going to share her slide presentation.
Okay, let's see.
I'm enjoying the chat, by the way.
Can everybody see my screen?
Yes.
Okay. So I chose more still life. I mean, they're food, but I chose like really the traditional like still life route because that's just, I wanted it to be different than what you guys were going through. So Walter Silver was an American photographer. And he created this one in like, he was in like the 50s range with the fruit. And it's just a traditional still life that you would normally see. This is my favorite work by her. She, as we've already talked about,
I'm not seeing
Jan's work before.
One second here. I'm just seeing the title page.
Oh.
Nicole, how about you? Are you just seeing the title page?
Yeah, same thing.
What do you?
So if you go to, what are you seeing, Katrina?
I'm like on my second slide. I don't know why you guys can't see it.
It might be that you're screen sharing like a different aspect of your screen. Like you can screen share various tabs.
Oh, maybe.
So it just might not be showing up because it's a separate window.
Yeah, I am not great with the
Do you
technology.
can you just save this as a PDF and then open your PDF?
Yeah.
If you go to File, Export.
What do you guys see now? Do you see my screen?
Have you done it into presentation format? Have you put it into presentation format?
Yeah.
Because we're just seeing it's not actually in presentation screen mode right now. We're seeing it as, oh, there you go. Okay.
How about now?
Yes.
You can see the still life one?
Yep.
Yeah, there we go.
Okay. Sorry, I'm.
That's
terrible.
okay. You got it.
So this is Walter Silver's work. This one is, as we've mentioned so far, Jan Groover's work. This one is one of my favorites because I love the space in it. There's a, I believe it's a YouTube video. It goes through her whole process. I wish I had linked that below, but I didn't. She has some really, really interesting space and use of light and like everyday objects you'd see, and it makes it almost abstract. Going back to Pablo Picasso doing still lifes of food, you can clearly see the difference between something like we saw in the very first slide I had with Walter Silver's work, and then this with the bright colors and the lacking the sense of depth. I mean, we know Pablo Picasso's work, all of his work kind of has the style to it.
What style is that, Katrina? How would you describe this flattening of space? Anybody study Picasso's work? What do you think of when you think of Picasso, the style? Cubism, right?
For everybody. Yeah.
Cubism?
Mm-hmm.
This is an unusual piece. It's less cubistic. It's more flattened.
Mm-hmm. I think it shows a nice, interesting sense of like the light you know, that we see there in the fruit and the relationship.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's nice to see the source of the light.
Yeah. Oh, how did I sorry, I skipped a slide. Well, maybe I didn't. Okay, so this is a work. I've actually never seen his work before, and going through this was really interesting in my work or in my research. It was shot on 16 millimeter and then transferred to video over time because he wanted to show the movement in his images. I didn't actually find, I just found his stills. I didn't actually, because I found this on New York Public Library, and I didn't find the videos, but all of the stills were very interesting to show a little bit of the body in there.
Definitely.
This one doesn't have food in it, but I wanted to include it because I just thought that it was a really important piece by Georgina Starr. The title is Still Life for a Woman. And if you take a look at all of the, like the different things in there, there's the flowers, and I think that's, I assume it's a champagne bottle in the background, and the fake lashes and things like that. I just thought it was an interesting one, and I definitely wanted to include it. I love the bright colors too. A lot of her work was color prints like this. This is another one that I thought was really neat and reminded me a lot of John Copland's work in a way, with the broken images. I don't know if you guys are familiar with his work, but I just thought it was,
triptych form.
The triptych form, yeah. I just thought it was so interesting, and with the fruit there, it just, I mean, it's not, you know, all about the fruit, but it's a different way of showing it, which I think is important.
What do you think that the relationship is between the fruit and the body here? Anybody? I'm putting that question out to the whole class. So anybody can respond. Rachel?
Anybody?
Rachel, you're on, are you with us? Rachel's not with us. Who would like to comment on this? Skylar?
The relationship between the body and the fruit.
Yeah.
I don't know. It just seems like a very intimate photo, obviously. So
yes.
The fruit just seem like personal. I don't know.
Yeah. Okay. You're getting, I like the comment on the intimate aspect of it. Shannon McGinnis?
I was kind of gonna say the same thing as Skylar.
It's almost like it was kind of, it looks like it's staged, but it also feels like you guys just said, like, intimate. Like, this is just the morning that they're having, or the afternoon, and for whatever reason the fruit is there, and you know what I mean? It seems a little candid, because
it is candid. Yeah. Yeah. There is something in the title that implies, I think, leads the viewer here. Peter, can you speak to this image at all?
I just thought it was interesting how the body is less in focus in the middle image compared to the fruit.
Yes. Well, it's where the critical focus is, right? So, Peter, where's the critical focus in the center picture?
Like on the tomatoes and peaches and apples.
Yes. So I just want you to maybe just guess what is being implied here. Throw out some ideas. Anybody? Because it's a really interesting picture. First of all, it's called Still Life with Jim. it looks more like, I mean, still life. Maybe the idea is a play on a life that is still, right? Will, what about you? You have any ideas?
I just like the balance between the guy's like bald head and then the vine on the top of the tomato. I think that creates a nice balance.
Uh-huh.
But I think it's interesting that the food is structured around the stomach. So it's like focused on the food, yet the stomach is in the background because the food is the most important part of like that area.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a great relationship there. I like that. Thank you. So I think we need to do maybe a little bit more thinking and research on this image, because there's some ambiguity to it. It's images can have multiple meanings, but there's the relationship of, I think, like you said, Will, the food to the stomach. Sometimes there's an equation of food and sexuality too. So there may be some hint at that here.
With the peaches and the pears.
Exactly.
All right, let's see. So the next image I've got here is another Andy Warhol. I wanted to add this one because it's called After the Party, and it's also a screen print, just like we saw with the tomato soup cans. And this was an image he took with a Polaroid, and then later changed it so that way it could be mass produced with his in his screen print the way that he did. I just thought it's such an interesting like space to it, and it feels very pop art. It feels very like his style, you know, as opposed to something else you'd see. I think the next one I have, oh no, not this one, but this is another Andy Warhol. Oops, sorry. Another Andy Warhol, also shot with a Polaroid. It isn't food, but there's an interesting correlation between like the things you use to cut food, the utensils, like in Jan Groover's work, because it's the part of the kitchen that you use, you know.
Yes.
Yeah, and we all know about Andy Warhol and the way he uses the mass production. So that's also in here with the multiple knives. And I think around I wrote this in the slide, 70 something still lives were taken with a Polaroid camera. And a lot of them he turned into work that was mass produced with screen printing. This is a Man Ray. It's not food, but I wanted to include it because I think that it's another way of showing a self-portrait, or not a self-portrait, I'm sorry, I can't speak today, a still life. And it's interesting with the way that it's all lined up, and he's got the different, it's like separated the different colors, and the same thing can be used for food.
What are you noticing in this picture? What's the difference between the top and the bottom row?
Some things are rotated a little bit, like there's like the objects are changed and the color.
So
that's why
different perspective.
And that's why I was drawn to it, because not everything looks the same from the same angles, and the same goes for food. I wish that I had a version of this with food, but I don't. This is another one that I included because I just wanted to show another way of doing it and another way of creating a photo, as we've all seen his rayographs before. And there's another photographer, I didn't include their work, but they've done rayographs before with food using like lemons and things that are see-through, so you'd see part of the work or part of the image.
Actually, this reminds me a lot of Adam Foos's work, and Adam Foos did pictures, photograms in color of food as well as other organic material. Do you remember that from
Maybe
experimental?
that's might be who I'm thinking of then.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I also included a Stephen Shore from his series that he did on the American road trip and the little road trips he took in the diners and in the restaurants that he ate, trying to capture, Americana and all that. You said that earlier, so I'm just going to be repeating the same information. Morris Hoverland is a photographer that I came across in my research, who did a lot of still lives in the 1940s and a lot of street photography in the years after that, which going through them, they kind of all also felt like still lives in the way that they were photographed and the people not moving. This one's also not food, but it has a very interesting feel to it. It feels very like dark and it's a little weird, like with the hammer and the broken mannequin's face.
And the broken vase, or what is a pitcher?
Yeah, it's a pitcher.
So there's a food relationship there.
And then this one's mine. I added in my work that I did for this project in 343 when I took it. I chose to redo the pairs, and I wanted to just show an example of, I wish I had more student work, but all I have is mine. So
yeah, the theme was not food for this project. You happened to choose food.
I did. It was a little different, but I figured that it kind of worked. So.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I love it. Yeah, really great example.
And I believe that's it. Yeah.
It reminds me of, genetic food production in a way, and the cross hybridization of food.
Which is happening so much more nowadays. It's weird.
Thank you. That was very interesting. Yeah, we saw some different approaches, quite different than what Nicole and I had presented. So it was good. Good.
I was hoping to show a little bit of range because there's so much you can do with this, and so many different avenues you can go, and to kind of take, an interesting image. So I think that's good.
Absolutely.
I'm excited to see what everybody does.
Yeah. Yeah. So was that helpful, you guys?
Yep. Rachel says very helpful.
Good, wonderful. So, this is just to get sort of whet your appetite, give you some ideas. Obviously, you can be inspired by this work, but don't feel bound by it. There are lots of ideas that are not being expressed here, right? There are just all kinds of possibilities. So it's a project that I want you to have fun with, to experiment with. When you do your first shoot, I want you to use your first shoot as an exploration. So try some different things. Don't feel like you have to have this one idea scripted out and do the shoot and then it has to be perfect, okay? The reason why we do a couple of shoots is to experiment and try some different subjects and some different approaches to that subject. And then for the second shoot, you can hone in on, strengthening your work, okay? So you've got the shoot to do this week. It's due by the end of the week, by Sunday night. We're going to go through editing on Monday, so you'll have some work to actually get started in editing when I do the demo. And then you will have the second shoot to work on next week. And then the third week is editing and printing. Okay? So how many of you are going to go into the studio? Just give me a sense of that. Raise your hand if you're planning on using the studio. Nicole, do you see? Oh yeah, let's do a physical raising of hand. I can see them better that way.
Okay, so we got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7,
Okay.
7 out of. Okay.
That's quite a few. Okay, great.
Pretty
great.
much everybody.
Yeah. Think about you can use different colored backdrops, use the 5 foot, and we've got colors, which are a lot of fun. So you can also use, there's a sweep there where you can just put the paper down on that, Nicole, Katrina, have the paper, use the 5 foot rolls in the portable backdrop and set that up. Again, I want to remind you to be, neat and clean in the studio. It's the one exception for food, that you're photographing food. Okay. So you're allowed to bring in food for this particular assignment, but take good care of the space and make sure that you clean up. And then, you can try both in studio and out of studio if you want. Try some different things. Any questions?
Do we have to use a camera for this?
What else would you do?
Like a scanner?
Oh, yeah, you can use, if you've done some scanning, you can do scanograms. That's perfectly fine. We've done some interesting work that way. Nicole, don't you have food that you scanned? We did have some in that
I
class.
know a lot of people in our class did food, cereal and all sorts.
Yes. Milk, I remember, was a big one. Amelia, are you good? Do you have any questions?
None that I can think of.
Okay. Skylar?
I'm all good.
You're good? I'm so sorry you're feeling sick.
That's all right. I've been blowing my nose through this whole thing, which is like super embarrassing, but I'm dead.
Don't worry about it. I'm glad you could join us. Okay, so we've had a nice period here, and I'm glad that everybody is together here and participating. If you feel like you want to, reach out to myself or Nicole, feel free to do that. If you have any questions about the assignment, or you just, you can meet with me. If you want to meet during my office hours, I want to remind you that my office hours are from 1 to 3 on Tuesday and Thursday. And Nicole, you're available Friday from
3 to 6.
3 to 6. Okay. The studio is open from 1 to 6 on Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. You want to make sure to sign up for a time in using the studio. And you can sign up for, what do we have it in now? Is it 2 hour or 1 hour blocks? 1 hour blocks. You can sign up maximum of 2 hours. So be very aware of how you're working and keeping safe. Make sure that you keep things cleaned up. Keep that 6 feet of distance. Wear your mask. And, we've got some great help in there for you guys. Katrina and Nicole, Sarah, Smelko. So we've got Sarah working on Sunday. Colleen Eggers is working on Friday. All these people have are advanced students and can help you out. And Katrina, you're working on Saturday from 1 to 6. So, all right.
Are you allowed to go in with a partner?
Yes.